So we are going to. Yes. Do you want to say something, Jorge?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Just
So
let me know when I should start.
okay, yes. So we are going to start this invited lecture by Jorge Manrubia Diaz in the course of software architecture. I want to start thanking Jorge for accepting this invitation. Jorge is working in Basecamp, and he was a student here of this university in the School of Computer Science Engineering here in Oviedo. So I am very proud that he is also now working in Basecamp, and I think he has a curriculum which is quite interesting because he knows about different aspects of computer science, how it works here in Spain. So I also asked him that we could probably do the conference like dividing it in at least two parts. One part which were more about technical things. So about, for example, what the title is fighting the merchants of complexity. But I also asked him that if he wanted to talk something about his experience or how does he see the environment in computer science here, especially in Spain, and the context. So probably at the last part, he will also do his opinion about this. So that I think that's also very interesting because he has a lot of background and knowledge about that. Okay, so I think without any further ado, we can just ask Jorge to continue. Okay, Jorge, it's your time.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you, Professor Labra, for the invitation. I'm seeing some familiar faces in the audience, and for me, it's great to be here. I wish I could be in Asturias with you all, but well, things are like they are. So, so yeah, as Professor Labra explained, I'm going to do a brief introduction to Basecamp and to myself. Then I'm going to deliver like the main part of the talk, which is fighting the Americans of complexity. And I'm going to leave like the last 10, 15 minutes to discuss a few things about career development and about my experience as a programmer. Well, first up, I'm going to start with an introduction to Basecamp. I'm a senior programmer at Basecamp. Basecamp is an American company, which is pretty well known. It's kind of small, so we are 60 people, but it's very well known worldwide because of because of their products, because of their technology, and because they are the founders, David Henner, Marian Hansen, and Jason Fried are. They have a lot of traction. They write a lot. They have strong opinions. Their opinions often are contrarian to what the industry is doing, and they are kind of pretty famous and very well known. So in terms of products, Basecamp, formerly Basecamp was known as 37 Signals, and they have released a number of products over the years. Their flagship product is Basecamp, which is a project management service. Well, I was a huge fan of the product before joining Basecamp. We were already using it in my previous job, and it's a wonderful tool for managing projects because it encourages communication flow within an organization. It bets on asynchronous communication. Despite of offering a real-time chat, it's essentially built around asynchronous communication and about making that communication flow, which is what you need within an organization. So if you don't know the product, I recommend you to check it out. Last summer, we launched Hey, which is a mail service. And the reception has been kind of phenomenal. Again, I recommend you to check it out. I love the product. It's highly opinionated. It's simple. It's full of very novel ideas that will kind of blow your mind about email, about how email was kind of broken and how in many deep ways, and how can you reimagine something that we all took for granted? And if you don't know it, I recommend you to check it out and see if you like it. And this is on the product side. On the technological side, Basecamp, probably many of you know that they are the creators of Ruby on Rails, which is a framework for creating web applications that has been around for as long as the first version of Basecamp. So that's like, I don't know, 16, 17 years. So Rails was like an extraction from the first version of Basecamp, and it's, again, widely used by many companies around the world. Currently, Basecamp is still like a huge contributor to Rails, and the other two big contributors are GitHub and Shopify. Both are using Rails, and they make big contributions to the framework. In Basecamp, we have like several Rails core team committers working for Basecamp. So essentially, all the Basecamp uses Rails for everything, for all their apps. And with that introduction, I'm going to start with the talk. So, so when I was invited here, I tried to think of some lessons that I had learned that I wish someone had told me when I was like in your position in the university. And I decided I wanted to talk about the most valuable lesson I've learned in all these years, which is that the ability to restate problems, to remove complexity, is a superpower in this industry. And if that sounds too ambitious, just not making things more complex than necessary gives you like a huge edge. Oops, sorry about that. Gives you a huge edge because we are in we developers are like magnets for complexity, and we usually end up in situations where we are when we end up using like not the right tool for the job, or we over-engineer things. And this is something that we need to be aware of. And I don't want to discuss this in the abstract. I want to show a very specific example, which is the case of single-page applications, to talk about these issues. So the terms merchants of complexity was coined by David Henry and Hanson years ago to kind of discuss the Basecamp approach to building web applications against what the industry was doing, which was betting on single-page applications. So single-page applications are different to traditional server-side rendered applications, where you rely on HTTP request responses to load screens when the user interacts with a web page. So a single-page application, in a single-page application, there is an initial load that loads the application with one of multiple requests. And then from that moment forward, the application becomes responsible of everything, of keeping the state, rendering everything, validating user input, validating business rules. So it's kind of a desktop application, but in the web, you load the application becomes responsible of everything. And this paradigm has like taken the world in like the last 6 years or something like that. And now it's like almost a de facto standard for new web applications. And there are two reasons for that are often quoted. One is that single-page applications are faster, more responsive, more interactive compared to the traditional server side render paradigm. And the other reason is that they are easier to architect, easier to develop, because there are like a great offer of frameworks, libraries, tutorials, and I see like a lot of new developers, junior developers, that the first thing they do is to start learning how to create single-page applications with React, with Node, and it's kind of you know, almost like, as I said, the de facto standard for creating web applications right now. And I have strong opinions about these two things regarding the speed, and I'm going to show you. I think there is a lot to say about whether single-page applications are faster or not. And regarding being easier to develop, I strongly believe that's false. That's not true. It's actually the opposite. It's true. They are way harder to create. And they are putting people and organizations in a lot of trouble that we are seeing and that I think we will see in the coming years. So I'm going to get into these two aspects. So the first one is, are single-page applications faster? And I want to say that, as I said, there's a lot to say about this. They are certainly faster in many ways compared to the traditional server-side rendered paradigm, where you use full-page requests for everything. But I want to show you a couple of things. Sorry, this is a Hey demo account. No, this is not a, I didn't want that. I want to open Trello. I will show you Hey later, okay? So I'm going to open Trello. Trello is I guess you know it. It's a fantastic product. It's a Kanban board implementation that has been around for a number of years. It has gone through some rewrites, but it's a single-page application. And I'm using this UK government board just because it's public and it's loaded with data, so that I can show you without any problem. You can check it too if you want. And I wanted to show you something. I'm going to open the Chrome DevTools. I have disabled the cache, and I want to profile how Trello loads. So I'm going to trigger a reload while Chrome is profiling. I'm going to stop the profiling. I'm waiting for the profile to build. And I don't know if you can see it. I'm interested in this. Oops. I'm interested in this side of the Chrome DevTools. So first of all, we have like so this was the startup time of Trello. This is like representative of every single page application you will find out there. There are applications that are more optimized than others, using multiple techniques that I will mention later. But what you see is that you get like 6.6 seconds of blocking time. Blocking time is how Chrome calls like JavaScript tasks that take more than 50 milliseconds. That means they are blocked. JavaScript is single-threaded. So that means that that's blocking the user interface. The user interface is not usable while those are running. So so if you check the timeline, how the application is loaded, just the background appears like what, like almost 4 seconds into the load, into the loading process. So you can also see that it's running 3.6 seconds of pure JavaScript, pure scripting. So this is a common problem with single page applications, which is a startup time. So 3-4 seconds, 2 seconds for starting an application or for loading a web page is not fast at all. Actually, it's pretty slow. Applications should load, web pages should load in essentially what the network latency dictates, but this is like way more. The reason is because, of course, it's loading a lot of JavaScript. So essentially, those are JavaScript files. Just the first 3 are like over 1 megabyte of JavaScript compressed. It's like probably twice as that if you can compress it. So if you want to parse and execute multiple megabytes of JavaScript, that's going to take seconds. And that's a common problem with single-page applications. And then you have another thing I wanted to highlight is that in single-page applications, when they rely on data served by some server, which is like the vast majority of single-page applications, you can I'm going to clear the network request. I'm going to open this one, for example. Sorry, XR. I'm going to filter by Ajax request. So I'm going to clear. I'm going to open one of these. So I wanted to show you this. So this, when I'm opening a Trello card, this is making a request for bringing some JSON with the data I want to render. The single page application is rendering that, is transforming this JSON into this HTML you are seeing. But I want to highlight that you don't really get rid of the network latency, which in this case is 260 milliseconds, which is, by the way, it's pretty good time. You can probably add another 200 milliseconds of scripting for rendering the HTML. So you are probably talking in around half a second or over half a second for opening a new page within the application, which is fast, of course, especially compared to server-side rendered application, but it's not instant. You can get rid of the network latency. That's my point. So going back to the presentation, those were two concerns about the speed that I want you to keep in mind for what I'm going to discuss later. So are they easier to develop? And my opinion, as I said, is that strongly no, they are not easier to develop. And I could talk hours about this, but I'm going to try to summarize the main pain points with single page applications. By the way, there is an article here, Escaping the SPA Rabbit Hole with Modern Rails, that I wrote a couple of years ago. And it talks about these things in more detail if you want to check it out. So, so first of all, with a single page application, the main problem is that you are dealing with an additional application, okay? So it's not like you are replacing the old server-side approach with a different approach. It's like you are adding a new application that will work and operate on top of the single page, on the server-side application. So you can save the work of not having to render HTML in the server, but instead you have to render JSON so that the application, the single page application, can receive the data it needs. And also, you still need to validate business rules, of course, background processes, user input validation. You still need to do all that in the server. You are just adding a new application. So another pain point with single page applications is that they have a special data interchange needs. And with this, I mean that a single page application, when you're working in a single page application, you want to make as few requests as possible, and you want those requests to fetch exactly the data you need. So this is for performance reasons. So for rendering some screen, you don't want to make 5 different requests and then wire everything in the client, because that's very slow. And that will be what the traditional RESTful APIs, REST APIs will encourage. So with a single page application, what you really need is okay, I want to render this person, this invoice, these line items, and I don't know, these categories. So I want to make a single request to the server that fetch exactly that data with exactly these fields, and so that I can render them and everything moves fast. So that's another concern, because of course that's not for free. You need to prepare those APIs. You need to prepare those queries, and that's something expensive to do. So the third concern I'm highlighting is that a single page application is responsible of everything. It's responsible of managing its state, its integrity, of rendering everything in a persistent process without performing a full page reload that does some kind of reset of the state. So in general, keeping a state in software is hard. And you know that because we all know that when you have some device that has a computer inside and that is misbehaving, what do? You restart it, right? So for example, the television, the clock, mobile phone, even the computer. So when it starts like going wrong, the first thing you try is I'm going to restart this and see if it fixes the problem. So that's because managing state is hard. And managing state in a single page application means that these are applications that are running on an unreliable environment, but like web browsers are, because you don't really control the hardware. You don't even control the specific browser. You don't control the extensions that the user has installed. The network is unreliable. So for example, imagine that you are rendering some screen and you need to make a couple of requests for persisting data in the server, and one request works and the other one fails. So what happens? You need to handle that, right? Because you don't have the luxury of restarting the state on every interaction. You are responsible for keeping things working. So again, this is all these problems are fixable, are doable, and just highlighting that they represent an additional ton of work. Finally, single-page applications require careful planning to be performant. As I said, you really need to work hard on the startup time for single-page applications. You really need to optimize that, and you really need to optimize how you are fetching the data. You really need to optimize how you do all the processing a single-page application does without blocking the user interface so that the application remains responsive. Again, all of this is doable, but you really need to know what you're doing for working on a single-page application. And in fact, as a result, other problem with single-page application is that because they require this specialization, they kind of encourage having like special kinds of developers within your organization. You can they kind of encourage having like front-end programmers or engineers that are experts on the single-page applications, and back-end engineers which are experts on the back-end side of the equation, which again is not necessarily bad, but it's another concern you want to keep in mind if you want to start your application as a single-page application. That's what the technology encourages. So I want to do a brief loop of how did we end up with single-page applications? How did we end up with the current situation? And I'm highlighting some milestones in how web technologies have evolved since we started with HTTP and HTML. So originally, HTTP was a request response protocol to serve HTML documents that a browser could render. Okay, so that was like the starting point. At some point, Netscape created JavaScript that was adopted by Internet Explorer. So at that point, you had the HTML documents and a language to offer some kind of dynamism in the page, to offer some kind of interactivity. Moving forward, year 2000, Mozilla, well, it was first Microsoft and then Mozilla that they kind of made this huge milestone, which was XML HTTP request. So that's the basis of the AJAX paradigm. Essentially, it was a JavaScript interface you could use in the browser for performing asynchronous HTTP requests, arbitrary HTTP requests outside of the HTML rendering flow. So this was huge because now you could create applications that, without performing a full page reload, could grab data and reflect that data in the browser in a way faster, in a way that was way faster than what you could do before. And I think that Gmail in 2004 was like the first mainstream service leveraging this technology, and everyone was like impressed by. I remember being super impressed by Gmail and how fast it felt compared to the previous state of the art. So moving forward, people, because browsers were like very incompatible between themselves in the way they approach JavaScript and browser APIs. The situation was like not standardized at that time, and people wanted to do all these things. So Prototype and jQuery were two libraries, especially jQuery, became super popular for having some kind of uniform way of interacting with a web page running in a browser in a predictable way without having to care about the browser's incompatibilities. By the way, Prototype was created before jQuery and was created by Sam Stephenson, which is he works currently at Basecamp. He's been at Basecamp since Basecamp almost started, I think. And that was like Prototype heavily influenced jQuery, how it evolved. So moving forward, one problem with jQuery and Prototype was that when you wanted to do a lot of things with those, you ended up with a super messy code. Because everything was, all the concerns were mixed together. So frameworks, client-side frameworks started to appear to organize this code. And there were many of them. I'm highlighting Sprout Core from Apple in 2010, Ember, which was a fork from Sprout Core, Angular from Google, 2013, React from Facebook. React from Facebook was like, it has become immensely popular. I think back in the day, one super important milestone that React achieved was that it popularized the technique of using a virtual DOM for rendering changes in a browser. So instead of performing the changes directly in the browser, it will accumulate those changes in memory and then reflect those changes in a single operation. So it turns out that this was a huge technological advance that heavily influenced other frameworks later. And it was React was simple to understand. It was very well promoted by Facebook, and essentially everyone, or a lot of people, started using React. Moving forward, 2015, GraphQL is published again by Facebook. GraphQL gives answer to that need I was mentioning before about being able to perform efficient queries where you are rendering screens in a single page application. So it's like a language for performing queries where you can express complex structured queries where you can detail exactly what do you want of each kind of record, and so you can fetch that information in a very efficient way. Moving forward, the last two milestones I'm highlighting are Next.js and React server-side components, which is that in 2016, Next.js, which is a pretty widely used React runtime, incorporated React server-side rendering, which means that you could render your React components in the server. And at the end of 2020, React announced that they were working on React server components. They published an RFC, which I'm not sure if there is like some library already usable, but they are working on that. So server-side rendering is an area of interest for client-side applications. And why is that? Because of what I mentioned of the slow startup time. Because fetching a lot of data and fetching a lot of code and rendering everything on a startup time is slow by definition. It's very slow, and rendering things on the server is faster. And another reason is that CEO, so search engines crawlers work much better with server-side render stuff that with with things that need JavaScript to render. So so now with this tool in place, I want to do an exercise which is going backwards and start asking ourselves, how did we end up here? Because I want to make a point, okay? So imagine it's 2021 and you are working on your single page application, and you are trying to add server-side rendering. So that means that you are essentially, you need a JavaScript runtime on the server if you don't have it already, like Node, for example, and you need to write some code that fetches your GraphQL server, for example, Apollo JS. You need to hit GraphQL, fetch the data in the server, transform that data into JavaScript objects or JSON if you want, render those partial using client-side components in the server, sending that HTML to the client. Then the client needs to run this process that SPA frameworks call rehydration, which means that they need to reconcile the HTML they are getting with the framework entities, because framework entities are meant to render HTML, but if the HTML is given, you need to reconcile both. So you are working on that, and you wonder how did I end up here? Why am I doing all this complex stuff? And so the server side part of the equation is because what I said, CEO, faster startup time. You go back, you're using GraphQL, you're building an API that is accessible via GraphQL. You are building specific API endpoints for specific screens, which is a lot of work, because you want those screens to load the data fast. And why are you using, why are you using a technology that requires this? Why are you using these SPA frameworks in the first place? Well, because you have to write a lot of code, because these are real applications, and they need to manage a lot of code. So a framework helps you organize that. So why are you writing a lot of code, a lot of JavaScript code in the client? And that's because you want applications to be interactive, and you want applications to feel good, to feel responsive. Okay, so I'm getting to the point where I wanted to get, which is that this kind of analysis, where you find yourself in a hole and you start asking yourself, how did I end up here? And you try to find the root cause, which is what I did here. And we are here because we want to have interactive applications that feels fast and good. That process is called problem restatement, and it's incredibly powerful. You ask yourself about the reasons, you analyze root causes, and you think of alternatives. And this is something that Basecamp folks did way sooner than 2021. They did this like 10 years ago. So, by the way, this is the work. These technologies I'm going to talk about are the work. They are not my work. I've been working at Basecamp for 1 year and a half. So this is the work of Sam Stephenson, Javan McMalley, and David Hanson mostly. Okay, so essentially, when they were working on this, I remember that I strongly disagreed with their take on how to build web applications. I embraced the single page application path, and then I suffered all the consequences I'm telling you about today. So that's essentially my story here. So essentially in 2012, Basecamp published TurboLinks, which was a library that was heavily influenced by PJAX, which was another library from GitHub. And Basecamp has bet on this path for 10 years. TurboLinks 1 was a version, an extraction from Basecamp 2. TurboLinks 5 was an extraction from Basecamp 3. And Hotwire was an extraction from Hey, which is the latest, the last Basecamp product. And I'm going to show you how they work a little bit. But I want to highlight that this process, because this is something that Basecamp does very well, which is, why am I doing this? This affects my productivity. This affects my developer happiness. Are there alternatives? So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hotwire. Hotwire, I'm not going to get deep into the framework because we don't have the time. Hotwire is a set of technologies that are meant to be used incrementally. So essentially, this means that with TurboDrive, which is essentially a drop-in technology, you just use it and forget about it. You just cover like a lot of the interactivity needs you need because your application becomes way faster. Then you have turbo frames, turbo streams to add like a little bit more of interactivity in the spots you need that, or of user interface fidelity if you want. And finally, you have a stimulus, which is a way of running, of wiring JavaScript with HTML in a modern way. And so when you need to run ad hoc JavaScript in your application, you can use a stimulus. But the idea is that you will use a lot of TurboDrive, a little bit of turbo frames, a few turbo streams, and rarely a stimulus. That's the idea how the framework is presented. I recommend you to check the documentation, which is, I think, fantastic and pretty easy to follow. So I want to highlight like the main motivation for PJAX and for the old TurboLinks is this. So when you have a web page, replacing everything in the browser, replacing the whole HTML document is very slow. And that's mainly because the browser needs to reprocess all the assets that are referenced typically in the head. So all the CSS, all the JavaScript, they need to be read, parsed, and re-executed, and that's super slow. But replacing the body in a web page is fast. So this is kind of the seed of TurboLinks and the seed of the things we are going to see now. So as I said, the first technology is TurboDrive. TurboDrive is something that when you are using it, kind of intercepts requests to the server. For example, when you click a link or when you submit a form. So it intercepts those requests so that they don't go through directly. Instead, the library performs a fetch request to the server, which is fetch is like the modern standardized version of XML HTTP request, of AJAX request. And the server responds with a regular full page with the information, with the HTTP response. And the TurboDrive library replaces the body. And the thing is that this feels very fast, and I'm going to show you. So this is a Hey demo account. So I have disabled the cache. I want to show you. I'm showing fetch requests, AJAX requests in Chrome. So if I navigate to open an email, as you can see, it was like pretty fast. And if we check the response, which was like 145 milliseconds, the response is a regular HTML document. But we are not loading the whole HTML document because TurboLinks is pretty sophisticated and it kind of compares the head. And if the head remains the same, then it replaces the body, and it feels fantastic. I'm not using cache in the browser, and as you can see, it's pretty fast. So this already gives you like the speed I showed you earlier before in Trello, where you are doing a synchronous request to grab some JSON and render some HTML in the client. And this is for free. This is completely abstracted away. You as a developer, you are serving regular and complete full pages. So an example of TurboFrame. TurboFrame is another bit of technology in Hotwire. TurboFrame covers the need for updating parts of a page. So when you want to load certain fragment of HTML in a page, you can do that without performing a full page reload. And the way to do that, it's like essentially you have like a turbo frame tag with a given ID in your page, empty. And when you perform a request that brings, you perform a request to the server that returns a turbo frame tag with the same ID and with some content, that content is added to the turbo frame that is in the page. And you can see how it feels in this menu, the Me menu in Hey. Sorry about that. So the Me menu in Hey is essentially using this. So when you click it, well, right now it's like it's cached because the second time it won't perform a server-side request. But if I reload Hey and open the menu, you can see the Ajax request. This is rendering. The menu. It's rendering the menu. It's not rendering like the full document because this is an optimization that Hotwire does. It's not rendering like the full layout of the page, but it could. It could, and it would work the same. And what this is doing is like it's the server side of this is rendering this menu. So if you, I wanted to show you how the code looks a little bit. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with Rails. Probably most of you aren't, but this is typical Rails code or typical MVC in the server code where you have a controller which is like interacting with the database to load the user's models in this case. And then you have like regular HTML rendering with a template in the server where you are like rendering all the menu sections. So a good thing about this is that this request, which is that the client is making for rendering the menu, you can open that in as a regular web page, and you have the menu here. So this is kind of pretty consistent with how the web works. And you probably know that with modern applications, sometimes they feel broken. The URLs don't work, and you run into all sorts of issues when navigating back. And this is kind of pretty consistent with how they work and respectful with how the web works. So finally, turbo streams are another technology you can use within Hotwire, where you can express like specific updates, like for example, add this fragment of HTML to this list, or update this HTML fragment, or remove this HTML fragment. The thing is that this is severely constrained, so you can do essentially these 4 or 5 operations, and you can do. I mean, it won't support other more fine-grained stuff. And this kind of this is something that Basecamp usually embraces, which is constraining things and limiting the things you can do, because it kind of encourages simplicity. And essentially with these 4 or 5 actions, you will cover like essentially the vast majority of needs you have for updating things in an interactive web application. And again, this is how it looks. This is again almost regular. Well, not almost. It looks exactly like regular Rails server-side code, where you have a controller that is performing an update RESTful action on the resource. In this case, this is for the screener in Hey that I will show you how it looks. So the screener is, let me show you first how it works. In Hey, the screener is a section in the application when you can decide whether whether you accept new senders or not. So people essentially can't put emails in your inbox without permission in Hey. So essentially imagine that I received this email from Todd, and I don't want to accept this sender. So I essentially screen that sender out. And that screen out is an update on the clearances resource. And the clearances resource is returning this turbostream commands. This is the command I'm showing you here. So the server essentially is doing, okay, I want to update this clearance, and I'm going to render this turbostream command, which is replied back to the client, and Hotwire library is going to remove that HTML fragment from the screen. But as you can see, you are, as a developer, you are working at a super high level of abstraction, like a lot of complexity is abstracted away. So finally, Hotwire also offers support for building mobile applications. And in fact, Basecamp has been like among the, I think they are among the few in the industry who has bet on hybrid mobile applications, at least popular hybrid mobile applications. And this hybrid approach is about mixing native controls with server-side rendered screens. So in Basecamp and in Hey, most of the screens you see are regular responsive web pages that the server is serving. But then Basecamp has two teams, one for Android and one for iOS, and they are able to use native controls to kind of enhance the user experience where it's needed. So the idea is that you start with something that is essentially a web application running in the browser, and you start like improving bits here and there with native controls when it makes sense. But the bulk of the application is still controlled by the server. So that's the hybrid approach that Basecamp uses. And I wanted to highlight that these are the reviews for the Hey application, and the reviews are fantastic because it's a great application. I absolutely love the iOS application, which I use daily. So again, Hotwire offers support for this, and comparing this with the alternative of building a specific, native applications, that's like that requires like a lot of people for building fully native applications, replicating every single feature in your application. That path is incredibly expensive, and also the path of using like web technologies that kind of abstract away the problem of working with native components is still like super expensive, because you have like the same problem I mentioned with single page applications. They are still additional applications to create and to maintain. So relying on server-side render screens gives you a huge productivity boost. So I think that the best way of appreciating the server-side render approach, you really appreciate it when you have gone through the pain of building single-page applications, because at some point you notice all the things you are not doing. So with this approach of Hotwire, which is essentially a very modern and interactive server-side render powered approach to creating web applications, you don't have additional apps to maintain. You don't need to build additional APIs to serve data for your application, because you can essentially query the database when you are rendering your screens. You can use SQL if you want. You don't have this problem of managing a state in a persistent process, because you're essentially rendering things in the server. And another very important thing is that all the validation, all the business rules, all that stuff remain in the server. So so you don't really have those concerns anymore. The environment where everything runs now is the server, which is like you don't really have network latency. Everything is control the requests and responses within your server, within the different services in your servers, is something you can control and you can prepare to be resilient compared to an application that is running in a browser. And how to make server-side code highly performant is a simpler and better understood problem that single-page application. So web caching is a well understood problem. So you get fast startup times without really doing much planning for it. You get fast interactions when you are persisting data, when you are showing screens. Essentially, it kind of encourages speed in comparison to what you have to do with a single page application. So so this is like essentially the talk, the main part of the talk. I want you to remember, like, being very mindful about development costs. This is something that it took me some time to get good at this, because essentially when you are like more junior, you kind of are always aiming to do things the best you can, and you don't really have like a good criteria to think in terms of development costs. But you really need to be very mindful about development costs. I show you an example that it's operating at a very high level, which is like architecting like the foundational technology of your application. But at a way smaller level, you should be always asking yourself if you are like attacking the problem from the right angle. Because one thing is like being able to solve very complex problems, but that's one dimension of skills. But another dimension of skills that I will argue is even more valuable is like to being able to determine if you are working on the right problems. And all these questions, I recommend you to try to think about them when you become a professional developer. And Basecamp has this term which is called judo, for essentially referring to problem restatement. And this idea of looking for alternatives that deliver most of the benefit with a fraction of the effort is incredibly powerful. And you should always be wondering about this. Like, okay, I need to do this. This is going to take me 1 week. Can I do this in 1 day? Or this is going to take me 1 day. Is there something here that I can do in 1 hour? You should like incorporate that kind of reasoning and discussion when you are working with colleagues, with product owners, with designers. This should be like your part of your daily tool chain. So I really encourage you to try to add this to your habits. So well, I'm going to, that's my email. So if you want to follow up on something of what I said here, I encourage you to write me. And I'm going to get back to you. Finally, I wanted to discuss a few things very quickly about things that I have learned in my career. I'm going to discuss four aspects. Let me check. Okay. Are you there? Okay. Yeah. So 1 second. So first of all, when the first thing that I want to discuss is technical work and having a technical career. So when I started working, when I graduated from university and started working, it was a common thing that you started your career as a programmer, and eventually, if you wanted to progress and you wanted to get better salary conditions and everything, you should become a manager. And I think that's kind of still true today in many places, and that was some kind of belief I had when I started working, and experience has taught me that I was totally wrong. That hasn't had to be like that at all. So when I started working, the first thing I did was believe it or not, becoming a civil servant. And I started working for the IT department of the Social Security Office in Madrid after going through a super hard examination process. So I'm not going to enter into details, but I wasn't quite happy with my job there. There were plenty of things I didn't like. But one problem, one obstacle I was certain I wasn't going to fix was that my job was managerial in nature. So I was meant to be a manager. I was meant to manage people. I was meant to go to meetings, reply to emails, and do all the things that managing work requires. And that made me incredibly unhappy, experience that side of the work. So I was trying to do technical work, but really when I was doing technical work, it was because I wanted to do technical work, but it wasn't because it was expecting from me to do technical work. And I loved programming. I still love programming to this day. My desire to manage people today is as low as ever. I don't really want to be a manager. I want to dedicate the bulk of my day to writing code and to work on technical problems, hopefully a little bit challenging. That's what I want to do. And it turns out that the industry is kind of rewarding people with this mindset, because becoming a good programmer takes years of experience. Like for most people, of course, you have like the genius side of the equation. I'm talking about normal people. Normal people really needs years of experience because before becoming good at something as complex as programming is. So there are plenty of companies there that acknowledge this and that offer you a technical path in your career so that you can have a progression and access better salary conditions and everything without abandoning the technical path. And in fact, in the case of Basecamp, for example, they are super explicit about this. There is they recognize like different levels of mastery for each role in the company. So for the case of programmers, you have like 5 levels of programmers, and they all do technical work. And I've heard that it's pretty much the same in plenty of other companies, like with different formulas. But if you go to the big ones, Facebook, Google, they all have like technical paths for people who don't want to abandon the technical path. And I really encourage you to, if you like programming, if you like technical work, don't think you need to abandon it to progress in your career, because that's not true. So the next thing I want to talk about is product companies against consultant companies. I already intended to talk about this, but yesterday they published this post about programmers, about the problem of investing on consultant companies and how the salary conditions aren't that great compared to product companies, and how Spain should try to promote product companies. So my take on this is the following. So first of all, a disclaimer here: there are like terrible product companies and there are great consultant companies. So I don't question that. But in general, if you're going to look for a job as a professional programmer, I encourage you to try to work for a product company. For sure, I agree with that article with the essence of that article. The thing is that the problem is very simple. If you're working for a consultant, as a consultant, for a company, not for yourself, I mean for a company that is paying you a salary, the profit for that company is the difference between what they can charge to the customer, to the clients, and your salary. So by definition, in the way that problem is stated, it's not in the best interest of the company to pay you a lot of money and to offer you a lot of things, to spend a lot of money on you. In comparison to a product company where, in general, the product companies, by definition, they make profit out of products, and the better the product, the more money it will make. So, and most companies know that what determines the quality of a product is the people working on the product. So again, by definition, a product company is probably more likely to spend money on you and to keep you happy than a consultant company. So that's my take there. Foreign companies versus national companies. So after I left after I left the work at the Social Security Office, I started working for a Canadian company. I was there for 6 years. Then I moved to, I changed to Basecamp 1.5 years. So I worked for 2 foreign companies, and my impression is very positive. So again, I want to move carefully here, because I know there are like a great number of companies trying to do great things here in Spain and in Asturias. So take this with a grain of salt. But in general, when you work, first of all, when you work for a foreign company, if you work for a Canadian company, if you work for a company, I don't know, a German company, company in the UK, these countries are essentially, the salaries are higher. And so because the salaries are higher on average, odds are that they will pay you more money for doing exactly the same. So that's a big, that's a very important point. We are going to try to look for a job. And then there is also the fact that it's, I really enjoy working with people from different backgrounds, different countries, different cultures. I find that appealing. That's appealing to me. I love working with, you know, now in Basecamp we have like people from Germany, from Italy, from a lot of Americans, from Canada, from the UK, and I really like that. And in my previous company, it was pretty much the same. And I kind of enjoy that kind of environment. I find value, intrinsic value in it. So so that was one thing. The last one, let me check my notes because I don't remember. Okay, yeah, how to apply to a job. There they go. 1 second. This is in Chrome. Yeah, so how to apply to a job was the 4th things I wanted to discuss today. So, so I've been on both sides of the equation of hiring and being hired several times in my career. And I wrote an article about how I got hired by Basecamp. When I was hired by Basecamp, you can check like the CV I sent to Basecamp there, the cover letter, and essentially how I applied to Basecamp. And my take here is that if you want to apply to whatever job, you need to understand that the people doing the selection, especially in the first rounds, they don't really have like much time for you, because by definition, if you receive like 1,000 applications, like which is kind of typical for Basecamp, for example, and you get like 3 people to work on the initial filtering, they can't really spend like 1 hour finding whether you are a good fit or not. So you need to keep that in mind when you are working on your application. Try to don't spend a single second doing exactly what everybody else does. So for example, it's very typical to say skills. So you send a CV, skills, and you list like a bunch of acronyms. I'm an expert in Rails, Ruby, JavaScript, React, whatever. So that's completely useless. That's like totally waste time and resources, and you should do exactly the opposite. So if you're going to to write, if you're going to apply to someone, to some company, you really try to make it very easy for whoever is evaluating your application to, first of all, understand why do you want to work there? Why are you a good fit? I'm not talking about saying, oh, my dream is working for you, but you really need to express why do you think you are a good fit for a specific offer. And offers are quite specific in terms of what the requirements they ask for. So if you, so for example, you can just take the offer, whatever offer you want to apply, analyze the requirements and try to write something about why you are a good fit for those requirements. And writing that doesn't mean like listing the technologies you know, because a list of technologies or a link to your GitHub profile, if you have it, that's completely useless. You need to say, oh, so you are working with, I don't know, MySQL. Well, I had experience doing this with MySQL, or if you don't have experience, I've read these books about MySQL and I believe blah, blah, blah. In general, adapt your application to what companies are asking for and don't do things as everybody else. So generic curriculums, in my opinion, are useless. So in both cases, for Basecamp and Bandzoogle, what I did was writing, in the case of Bandzoogle, an email, in the case of Basecamp, this cover letter. And I have tried the same approaches with other companies, and it's always the same. It's like, I want to work with you because of these reasons, and I think I'm a good candidate because of these other reasons. So that's my last piece of advice. And that's all. Thank you so much. We can go to the questions now. I think I'm a little bit late.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Yes, we are here.
Okay, cool.
I mean, we have a chat, and I was adding to the chat the links to the post that you were saying about the Eduardo Manchón. I think it's a quite interesting post about the situation here, especially in Spain, which is, I think, I agree with some parts of the post, because I think Eduardo has a good experience about how it is working. And I also agree that it is not necessary to decide that if you want to progress in your life, you have to remove from the technical parts. So especially here in this course, which is software architecture, there is software architecture. Some people think that if you want to become a software architect, you have to stop coding and just write UML diagrams. That was like maybe 20 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago. But I think nowadays, software architects, they are people who are also people who take code, and they have responsibilities coding. So that's what I tell my students. So it's not necessary to remove that part of the technical thing. And I also added the link to the post that you put here. So it's also in the chat. Okay, so now we have like maybe just 15 minutes for questions and answers. So I think it was quite interesting, your talk. So I prefer that if anyone wants to do a question. Otherwise, I will do it. Yes, I think there is someone. Can you try to?
Yeah,
yes.
It's me.
Okay.
Hello. So.
Hi.
You talked a little bit about the differences between national and international companies, and you talked about a little bit about salaries, how same work may be paid higher in international companies. But I would like to ask if, other than the salary, for example, is there like a trend, let's say, that differentiates like how new employees can grow in national companies versus international companies? I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I think one problem is that, so if we're talking about product companies, I don't think there is a big difference at all. In fact, I'm sure, so for example, I know plenty of Spanish product companies, or a bunch of Spanish product companies that are amazing places. I'm thinking, for example, in Mercadona and Mercadona Tech. They have like a, I mean, I don't know them, but I follow their engineering blog, and you can say that they are like top programmers and absolutely top company from the technological point of view. So in these companies, I tell you, I'm sure that your progression as a programmer doing technical job, I think it's what you can expect in a foreign company. It's the same. There, I mean, you can really have like a. You don't take care of people. It's really difficult to have a good level because people are going to go away in our industry. Because luckily, there's like way more. Offer than demand of programmers. Sorry, there's way more demand than offer of programmers. So we can choose, and we want to stay in a place where we are not happy. So I don't think that that's like a big difference. But my point is that in general, I mean, for foreign companies, it's easier to find product companies outside of Spain than in Spain, because sadly, in Spain we don't have like that. I think there are plenty of issues, but the truth is that there are more product companies outside of Spain than inside of Spain, and that's a key factor. And the other factor is what I said, that the cost of living and the salaries are higher in other countries that are willing to hire talent from Spain because they can't find the talent they need in their countries, and that's something you can benefit from if you apply to them. But it's more in that regard. I don't really think there is like a big difference between a good product company in Spain and a good product company in Silicon Valley at all.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Something I wanted to ask you, because maybe other people will jump, but something that I was looking, I have this book from the people in Basecamp. I don't know if you know, this is remote. So I remember I bought this book some time ago, and it is, so I think the people from Basecamp are, they work remotely from very early. And I mean, now with the COVID, a lot of companies have jumped to go to work remotely, but probably your company is one of the companies that has probably most experience there. So what can you say about that, also about the working remotely, and how is it that?
Oh, sure. So Basecamp, they has been like promoting remote work like since forever. I've been lucky because when I was working for Van Zugel, which was the Canadian company, also they had like a lot of experience working remotely since they started, like around 2003, 2004. So I worked in two places with a very strong remote work culture. What I have to say is that, well, first of all, you have that book that you showed, the remote book by Basecamp. They also have like a book which is that you can read online, which is Shape Up by Ryan Singer. You can go to basecamp.com/books, and you can see like the books there. So remote work is, I think it's, I mean, for me, it works perfectly well. I know that it's not the same for everyone. There are people who don't, I mean, from the employee point of view, for me, it works like, I mean, I would never go back to the office if you ask me, okay? So for me, it works perfectly well. There are people that are, maybe because they are more extroverts, or they really need to interact with other people for being energized. So for those people, they might struggle when working remotely. So I wouldn't say remote work is exactly for everyone. But from the company point of view, I think, so Basecamp is by far, in terms of how they work, it's the best and most efficient way of working I've ever seen. The company is incredibly optimized, and it's like seeing. I mean, from the outside, I was a big fan, and from the inside, it's like it's amazing how they work and how they perform on a daily basis. But for working remotely, you really need to understand and to get good at working remotely. I see a lot of companies with the pandemics have gone remote and have tried to apply the same principles they were and the same working methodology they were using in the physical world to the remote work, and that doesn't really work. There are plenty of things to say about this, but I say that the biggest factor for me to make a remote organization work is to bet on asynchronous communication. Asynchronous communication means that instead of real-time chat, instead of video conferencing and calls, instead of real-time communications, you bet on asynchronous communications. Things that you can, I mean, there are plenty of systems. You can, places where you can write a comment and keep doing your work, and then someone is going to get and reply when that person can. And, encourage a way of working where people are autonomous without having to wait for somebody else to, be synchronized with them to get something done. So that's, for me, that's the key factor. And I think that's the problem that most companies are struggling with, like embracing that asynchronous model, or not even knowing that they need to embrace that asynchronous model.
So do you have some regular meetings, or how do you don't have meetings at all? Or?
Yeah. So in my company, in my team, we do a weekly meeting. So we meet midly on Tuesdays, but it's mostly the real intention is just to see our faces and to realize that you are working with other humans, and that's like the highest value. Many of the teams in the company don't do that. I work in the security, infrastructure, and performance team with other 3 colleagues, and we do that mostly to talk. And most of the times we don't even talk about work. We talk about, I don't know, the COVID or whatever. So we are very light meetings just to connect with people. But in terms of work efficiency, we don't have any other meetings. And in Basecamp, I very, very rarely meet for work. I mean, it's very rare that I have a meeting that is work related.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, any other? There are people who want to ask. If you want, yes.
Yes. Hi, Jorge. It's nice to meet you here.
Hi, you're Daniel, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So you've been talking about product companies and, well, Basecamp and your experience, but I feel like you jumped to one of these companies after being, well, hired in a quite important position with as a civil servant. What's your opinion about trying to jump from the beginning to one of these top product companies? I mean, is it worth it to try to maybe just get your career finished and try to, hey, let's try to be hired at Basecamp or something like that? Is there a room for new, well, junior people in this kind of places?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, there are, of course, so when you don't have experience, that's a great question, because when you don't have experience, your situation is quite different to when you have experience. I really encourage everyone to try. So I see a lot, and I've done this a lot in my career, when you kind of dismiss yourself, you kind of put you down, you kind of say, okay, my English is not good enough, my skills are not there, my experience is not good enough. And I recommend you not to do that, because in general, in my experience, when you're working, for example, with a case in the case of English, when you're working with English-speaking people, they are incredibly understanding with the fact that you are not a native speaker. And I remember that in my early years, I felt kind of ashamed of my accent, about not being able to speak. And it in practice, it's actually quite the opposite. People really appreciate the fact that you are able to speak 2 languages, because that's quite something that most English-speaking people can't do. And of course, you need to be able to communicate, and you need to be able to write pretty well, and you need to be able to perform in an English-speaking environment. That's not an obstacle at all. So in terms of skills, you're right. So for example, in Basecamp, they lean towards hiring people with experience because they want people to be self-sufficient and to work. They use this sentence, this model, which is manager of one. They're looking for managers of one, which is that people that is really autonomous for performing once they are hired. They have hired junior profiles, and they might hire junior profiles again. But in general, they are looking for people with experience in recent times. So, but this is a concern, by the way, within the company, and it might change. But in general, I see that sometimes I see junior offers from pretty interesting companies. And Basecamp is probably super well known, but there are like a ton of companies you haven't heard about that are like Basecamp, small, remote, interesting, with interesting people. And sometimes they are looking for junior profiles, and I really encourage people to try. And even if you feel you don't really have the experience, I recommend you to try either way. Maybe even being like honest about that, being honest about your lack of experience, but trying to make a case of why you think you are a good candidate. For example, I was able to learn this when I was working on this, and I did this. So, at the end, I recommend you to try it. That's what I'd say.
Okay, thank you.
There is one question, I think, from Julian, which is an invited one. He has
Hi.
raised. Yes.
Yes,
Hi.
hello. Hi, thanks for opening up the invitation for everyone. It was really cool to hear the talk. So Jorge, I'm gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate with this question. So the industry right now is really invested in JavaScript and React, right? And not only React, but these other single page approaches to building web applications. And that's moved the job market into a lot of companies searching for these kinds of engineers that are fluent in React or in JavaScript or in Vue. So I know that this is a talk for a university, so I wanted to hear your take on how do we, as engineers for product companies, steer that boat that's going all the way full on JavaScript for the industry, and bring more people to this nicer, or not nicer, but different and more simplistic approach to building applications. Because as a job seeker, it's super hard now to go find a job in pure Rails, because big companies, or a lot of companies, are searching for JavaScript engineers, and then because they get more JavaScript engineers, then they search for more, and the market just grows for JavaScript engineers.
Sure. That's a great point and a great concern. I actually going to say something about career development. So there is a book from Chad Fowler that it was originally called "My Job Went to India" or something like that. But it's about career development for programmers, and I remember that he mentions a point, which is that if you do what everybody else is doing, by definition you become less valuable. So there is something good about working with JavaScript if everyone is doing JavaScript, but kind of getting specialized in something that is kind of a niche, or that is not that extended, makes you more valuable, because there are not that many programmers with your skills. And actually, right now, on average, the salary of Rails programmer is way higher than the salary of JavaScript programmers. That's a consequence of this. I just want to make that point. So how do you get rid? How do you avoid if you don't want to work? First of all, I don't think there is not. I think it's okay to working with JavaScript or with React, and if you want to work with that, that's a great, especially for junior programmers, because there is a lot of offer. But if you want to to avoid that and to work on companies with other approaches, you can still do that by just doing some research. And you can scout how the companies making offers in these remote jobs boards and try to investigate them. So for example, I know that Shopify, which is do you know Shopify? It's a Canadian company which is huge, offering like websites, tools for building e-commerce websites. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. They are hiring like 2,000 Rails engineers like this year alone. So GitHub is always like releasing offers. Those are two giants that are invested on Rails. If you go to weworkremotely.com, that's another remote job board that keeps offering jobs that use Rails, or maybe Symfony with PHP, or Django with in the Python world. So those offers exist. You have Django and Python, PHP. You also have Elixir, which is also another niche of technology that is getting traction. So the offers are there, but by definition, they are not mainstream, or they are not like what everybody else is doing. That's for sure, because everybody's betting on JavaScript right now, and there is nothing wrong with that, other than the pain that a lot of companies are going to suffer a few years from now. But
I'm sorry to interrupt because it's 11 now. I have to another course, so I will stop the recording now.